Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Cube Outside the Box. We're going to talk about Cube and it's going to get weird. My name's JJ, I'm your personal Cube connoisseur. Today I wanted to do my typical sample draft for the Cultic Cube since it's going to be on MTGO very soon. And with the raging success of the Dekkaru Cube, which I've been having a blast with, I definitely wanted to follow up on the Cultic Cube, especially since John is such a supporter of Cube in the community. Unfortunately, we weren't able to work out a time where we could play test or draft together. So what we did was we got together and talked about the cube in some fair depth. A lot of it's going around the design philosophy, but there are some little tips in there as far as how we should approach drafting the cube once it goes live. So I definitely want you to tune into that. Before you do that, please check out the description for this video. John has an excellent article going up on the mothership. It should already be up by the time you're watching this video. He's got an episode of his own coming out on his YouTube channel, which you should definitely listen to and watch. And then there is a Chateau Cube episode from a week or so ago where he and Gwen talked about their the two of their cubes together. All of those and this video will be some excellent insight into the cube. If you listen to and watch all of those things, you should be in great shape to draft it when it goes up. It's going up Wednesday, May 20th of 2020 at 10 p.m. Pacific time. So real quick, check out the description of this video, click on all those links, listen, watch, read, do all those things, and then come on back and listen to John and I talk about the cube.
All right, well, if it works for you, let's get into your cube a little bit. I am
Nice.
beyond excited. I am impressed. The response to Dekkaru's cube going up has been everything I hoped it would be, which is a lot of hype, a lot of discussion. I'm sure he's getting a very wide range of types of feedback. Everything from very unreasonable, I hate this card because I lost to it, up through, I've seen people just pull up his list real quick. He was in my stream a few minutes ago. Someone pulled up his list and started chatting about one drops in red. And it was like a great discussion. So my hope is that a very important discussion. My hope is that we see a very similar level of energy and desire to have fruitful conversations when your cube goes up.
Yeah, I hope so.
And I'm also very excited to contrast the two because I know that was a kind of part of the point here.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Both Gwen and I are part of CubeCon. We're organizers for this event that was to have taken place in Madison, Wisconsin at the end of May.
Right.
That's super exciting. It's a project that was really spearheaded by Jonathan Brostoff. We got a bunch of awesome people involved in it. Zach Hill, Zach Halpern, and Brian Kowal is hosting the thing. And so we've got 10 cubes on the slate for the main event at CubeCon. It's going to be super exciting when we actually get this thing to happen.
Right.
We're going to be firing something like, I don't remember the exact numbers anymore, but between 70 and 80 draft pods will fire over the course of 3 days.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's so exciting. And so we had this opportunity to work with Wizards of the Coast, which is a dream come true. They were excited about the CubeCon project as well and wanted to partner with us. One of the ways they're partnering with us is they agreed to host 2 of our 10 cubes on MTGO. So we...
Now, just out of curiosity, was that in the works before the whole quarantine issue arose? They were already going to do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We had this relationship pretty well locked in. In fact, they had given us help in various ways already, which has been great. Before the whole quarantine and COVID and all this.
Sure.
So then once COVID happened, then everything was sort of in flux, understandably. And Wizards was being a little reticent about, what dates these might go up on MTGO. They wanted to sort of wait and feel things out, which I totally understand.
Yep.
And we had agreed with part of our arrangement with Wizards was we agreed that we weren't going to talk about our relationship until Wizards formally announced the
Of
relationship.
course.
So we've had to keep on the mum about it, and
Oof.
then it wasn't like totally certain whether it was going to go forward. So all that was kind of touch and go. But then they got back to us, I don't know, a month ago and said, we want to forge ahead with this thing.
Great.
Oh yeah. And they also settled for sure on the cubes that they wanted to use. So we'd been pushing 3 cubes. Um, and what we really wanted to do was have WotC use these 2 cubes, one designed by Gwen Decker and one designed by myself. That would be these sister cubes, legacy environments that are of relatively similar power level. But we wanted to push them in very different directions and show some of the range of what Cube has to offer people, even when we're holding a lot of variables pretty static. But WotC wasn't sure about using 2 legacy cubes. They thought they might look too similar. So we were pitching them on how different they were going to look and how advantageous it would be to show this, range of cube experience. We were trying to
Right.
sell this as a good idea, which I honestly think it is a good idea and an awesome comparison. But then we had a fallback plan, which was to use one of our cubes and then a Ravnica cube,
Mm.
um, which we'd been working on too, and it's an awesome cube as well. But
Always
it's
popular.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That would have been great too. I'm excited about that cube as well. But a black cube is also slightly less interesting, at least to me
Absolutely.
personally. Um,
I think it'll hit a less wide audience, right?
yeah, yeah,
This these cubes that you do have going up should provide something for just about everyone. Um,
right.
you know,
Yeah, I hope so. Um, I think they will. So Gwen and I, we knew we wanted to aim for a similar power level, but we wanted to be sure that we were drawing a bright line between our 2 environments. So we were contemplating different ways of doing this, introducing different strictures for ourselves in our design. So we thought about things like maybe Gwen's cube would have 0 planeswalkers in it, and mine would have a whole grip of planeswalkers.
okay.
Or maybe um, Gwen would have tons of pretty narrow archetypes, like 1 card archetypes, um, and mine would only do these sort of macro archetypes. And both of these kinds of ideas, I I think we ended up taking some inspiration from these because it's my personal predilection to support macro archetypes at the expense of supporting narrower ones.
Okay.
And Gwen has sort of the reverse impulse. It's my personal predilection to run lots of planeswalkers in the environment, and Gwen doesn't especially like them, or he likes planeswalkers that have more tailored application.
Yeah. Even just looking at the list real quick, I can see a big difference in the Planeswalker section,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
which I'm
right.
excited about. I mean, it's cool that it's a very fun environment. I've been enjoying drafting as cube, but I also like the idea that it's not going to feel like a copy because, even just looking at your white planeswalkers and seeing 4 different flavors of Gideon is like there's some decks in there that you can't
Yeah,
play in Dekkaru cube.
that's right. You could play a Gideon tribal cube
Right.
with
Right.
Gideon of the Trials, who's got the
Hmm.
0, with the emblem that you can't lose the game as long as you control a Gideon. I'm
Yeah.
being like slightly tongue in cheek, but I mean,
Well,
obviously, it certainly can happen that you can end up with a couple of Gideons in the pile, and that's a real condition that the opponent
absolutely.
has to wrestle with.
I mean, I got a Prismatic Vista like ninth pick in pack 2 the other day, so anything can happen here. I mean,
Yeah,
truly anything can happen.
right, right. Um, yeah, so we also thought about having zero overlap between our two cubes, except maybe for lands or something.
Hmm.
But we dropped that too. I think that so we ended up with, I don't remember exactly, maybe 50% overlap in cards between the two lists.
Okay.
And um, I think that this is good too, because our lists feel, at least to me, really radically different. So there's this Venn diagram has a substantial section of overlap, but we did want to show that um, designers' decisions change formats radically, and labels that people have relied on for cubes for years now, um, especially labels that are tied to different constructed environments like standard, modern, legacy, vintage. These labels, they have some content, they have some meaning, but on the other hand, there's such a huge, astounding range of what a legacy cube can mean that the term legacy cube, um, I mean, it doesn't provide a great deal of description, and
Right.
maybe we need a better naming convention, a better language for talking about cube and describing cube.
This I think could honestly be a whole multi-hour episode on your podcast,
Yeah,
trying to improve the naming conventions, because even keeping it something a little bit more limited, like a modern cube, uh, you know, that doesn't tell you everything. It tells you more,
yeah,
but there's still so many options.
yeah, yeah. There definitely are.
It actually looks like your cubes share probably less than half
Yeah.
card overlap. I pulled up a compare,
Oh
and I'm
yeah.
just kind of slowly scrolling through it, hoping that viewers will
Okay.
be able to get something out of it. But the average section has 20 to 30 cards overlap per, like, color. Um,
Okay. Okay.
uh,
That's interesting. I had worked out the numbers at some point, but I totally forgot them. So is it more like 40%, you think? I don't know. I guess it's
Probably
sort of
between
immaterial.
30 and 40. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
30 to 40. Oh, wow.
Yep.
That's even fewer than I thought. That's fascinating.
I'm only, and that's, I'm that's a very rough
Right.
estimate. Just
Right.
as an easy example, white has 36 cards that are in both cubes versus 43 and 41 in your or his cube respectively.
Hmm.
So that's, a third ish, and
Right.
that seems like a common spread, and that's super cool. I think that's really neat. And again, looking through the list now, I'm seeing cards in his that I'm like, oh man, that's not in the Cultic Cube. I'm gonna miss that. And then I'm seeing other
Yeah.
things that are so exciting that are going to be in your cube. So
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, for sure. There are, yeah. I love Gwen's cube. I've had the opportunity to mess around with it more now, which is awesome because we had some initial conversations and then we more or less went our own ways with the cubes, and so that we could sort of reconvene later and see what we had come up with. And I mean, yeah, his list looks amazing, and I love a lot of not only individual cards but some of the strategies that he's built into the
yep,
cube. Lots of fun stuff.
it's been
Um,
very fun streaming it.
yeah.
And I last night I streamed two full drafts,
Hmm.
and then those didn't go as well as I wanted, but they went okay. And a lot of that's on me. It wasn't on the cube. Uh, and then I stopped streaming, and I was like, well, I probably have time for one more. So I did one
Yeah.
just for myself, and I think I'm new to streaming, but I think that's a pretty good indication uh, when someone who's doing it for an audience then says, you know what, I just want one that I can enjoy for myself too.
Yeah, that's great. That's really cool. Right, you mentioned some cards that aren't here and that might be surprising compared to Gwen's, for instance, or compared to other kinds of lists. Generally, this is I totally understand that. I've got some cards. I don't even know how much these absences would pop out to people. Um, who aren't as well versed as you or I in cube design, but maybe they do. Um, but for example, I have found that there's some old standbys that are extremely good cards that were, for my purposes, in fact, too good by way of
Okay.
supporting some of the macro archetypes when they're playing against other particular decks or other particular archetypes. They felt like
Okay.
they were too much of a too good a foil to other
Right.
strategies.
Sure.
Um,
What's
so
an example there?
well, well, let me back up for just a moment, if I may, and
Of course.
say that part of the one of the major goals of this cube was to support the big pillars of magic deck types in quite a robust way. So I'm calling these the macro archetypes, and here I'm thinking of aggro, mid-range, control, and combo. So I don't have um, archetypes that require a lot of work to assemble fiddly pieces for the most part, nor do I have a great many of the classic combos that we associate with cube at high power levels.
Right.
Um, like, I mean, Storm, notably, maybe, which doesn't make much sense outside of Vintage anyway, I don't think.
Agreed.
Um, but,
Or maybe
Kiki.
that was going to be my go-to example. Yep.
Yeah, right, exactly. Kiki Twin or something like this.
Yep.
Um, so I want to support aggro, mid-range, and control across the colors quite well, and to have a lot of really deep access to key components to these kinds of to cards that these strategies want. So I've got a million variants of cheap burn spells, lightning bolt variants. Um, so given that the real focus is on supporting these macro archetypes, there are some cards like, for instance, Wall of Omens. I think is a good example of an awesome white card. It's great for control decks. Um, Costs one and a white for a 0/4 that draws a card when it enters the battlefield. Um, I love this card. I'll play Wall of Omens all day in my control decks. But man, it just stops aggressive decks in their tracks.
Yep.
And it's like this is exactly the matchup in which it's good. In a control versus control matchup, like it's a cantrip, which is that's cool. But otherwise, the opposing control deck doesn't care. The mid-range
Sure.
deck is going to go over the top of this thing pretty quickly, and it doesn't care that much about this thing either. So these walls, anything that costs 2 mana for a 0/4, most of these kinds of things came out. Spellskite is another one that came out
Oh, okay.
as well. And there are other cards like this, like Sulfuric Vortex. It's a beloved card for the Red Deck Win style deck.
Yep.
It is backbreaking when the aggro deck resolves that against a control deck. In an aggro
Yep.
mirror, it's a real dubious card. It could even, I mean, if things aren't going your way, then it could be a totally dead card.
Yep.
Even in the mid-range matchups, yeah, I'm not nearly as high on it as elsewhere. So it's got particular application where it's exceptionally good, but outside of that, it falls off some. Scavenging Ooze just wrecks reanimator strategies hard.
It
Um,
does.
so, so anyway, these are some cube staples I think that don't appear in the list. Othalia is another big one. Um,
Oh yeah.
Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, excellent white weenie card, whose mana tax just really messes badly with control decks.
Those are very good examples. Those are the kind of cards I agree that I would look for as signposts in a legacy cube, or in a
Yeah.
generally any kind of unrestricted cube. I would expect to see there maybe. Um,
Yeah.
and interestingly, some of the things that I've noticed, or I've looked for that I haven't seen in the Dekkaru cube would be things like lightning bolt or counterspell. Again, just some of the kind of standby best in class, I
Hmm.
think, is a good way to think of those. They are the best at what they do, efficiency wise, that
Yeah.
are notably absent, which I think
Yeah.
makes a very different play environment.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. Um, Little tweaks like that make just worlds of difference. Another thing that I've heard people commenting on this as I've watched streams and so on. Gwen goes less. Gwen runs fewer sweepers than I do,
Yes.
and I mean, this is a conscious decision he's made in order to achieve the balance that he's looking for in the environment, which
Right.
is awesome. I'm making an observation and not at all making a criticism of the environment. I go much deeper on sweepers, and the sweepers are, of course, a controls necessary check against aggro decks. Um,
Yep.
so we've all this is to say that he and I, every cube designer who's interested in supporting these macro archetypes is going to be involved in this, walking this tightrope, trying to balance the archetypes as they see fit. And for
Yep.
me, got more, I've made aggro stronger, I think, than in Gwen's, in the sense that I go deeper on 1 and 2 drop creatures and I've got more access to burn and this kind of thing.
Sure.
However, I um, weaken aggro or make control better by affording increased access to sweepers. So, you
Okay.
know, we're balancing these poles in different fashions.
I like that. I like that, and I think it's very easy to underestimate how much of a difference that's going to make in feeling. Um,
Yeah,
but I think it's going to be quite clear once we can draft them back to back how very different that's going to feel.
yeah, I think so.
On the topic of sort of macro archetypes, and I think everyone knows the answer to this, but I'll pose it as a easy one. Where in all that would you put ramp as a
Hmm.
strategy? How do you see that?
I support ramp similarly in this cube to ways that I have traditionally supported ramp in other environments that I've designed. And that's not true for everything about this cube. Um, but ramp strategies, I think, for these, one wants all of the 1 drops that you can possibly cram in, um, that are 1 drop accelerants for green. I think green
Yep.
wants as many of these as possible, because green really has one principal strength in its color pie,
Yep.
um, which is ramping. I mean, it's color fixing too, and it's got others. It's got other strengths, but really, ramp is green's main strength. And
I very much
in
agree.
yeah, and in particular, it's 1 mana ramp where green really shines, because you can get all the signets and talismans and mind stones and so on that you want, not to mention Moxen, obviously, and other kinds of effects like this. But it's setting aside things like the Moxen, green gets the cheapest ramp, so it needs to capitalize that on that, especially because that very inexpensive ramp tends to be very fragile as well.
Mm.
Bolt the bird is, lesson number one
Yep.
when we sit down to learn Magic, right? It's much more difficult to bolt the signet, of course. Um, so I provide green with a huge amount of access to 1-drop acceleration and also 2-drop acceleration, which I like a lot less, but green wants all of these kinds of effects it can get, because in principle, any deck uh, that wants to cast green spells, or that wants a lot of green in their decks, is going to want a lot of this acceleration.
Right.
So I want pretty wide access to this at the table. So I don't, unless somebody's doing something really quite unusual with their environment, something interesting with their environment, I think that I would encourage people to run a ton of 1-drops
Sure.
in green. I mean, if you're 360, you maybe don't run every one necessarily, but you should go pretty deep. And don't forget that there are these land enchantments like Utopia Sprawl and
Right.
Wild Growth, which are still better than a Llanowar Elf. They're harder to interact with for the opponent, and they have kind of virtual haste after turn one. You know,
Yep.
like
And your rampant growths as well, right?
yes,
You've got
right.
some again hard to interact with unless you
Hmm.
run a bunch of stone rain effects.
Yeah, that's very true. Right. Um, yeah, and there are 2-mana enchantments too, like Fertile Ground and so on. All of these are better than elves in a lot of ways. I mean, you know, if
Absolutely.
you're playing opposition, if you're playing natural order, of course there are reasons that you would prefer the creatures, but
Right.
um, another way that I think people go wrong, not necessarily in um, a cube design, but in deck strategy or deck design, is in trying to do some mega ramp strategy that's creature based in green, or maybe trying to do some mega ramp strategy full stop, like trying to go from a Llanowar elf all the way up to Ulamog or something. I don't think
Right.
that's what you should be looking to do, because your bird gets bolted and then you're sitting there with your Ulamog in hand that you're never ever going to be able to cast. Um, so hence, I prefer to make different use of the ramp creatures. I mean, by all means, put a Llanowar elf into play in a deck that has natural order and use that Llanowar elf to, go get some green fatty. That sounds great.
Okay.
But in general, I wouldn't use the 1-drop creatures to try to get to big fatties unless you're doing other kinds of cheat besides just getting a little more mana a little faster.
I like this take on it. You're viewing it as a acceleration, meaning it's going to get you into the mid game earlier
Yes.
than your opponent. Not necessarily you're going to hard cast Emrakul on turn 6,
Yes.
or
Yeah,
something along
that's
those lines.
exactly right.
Sure.
Right. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I'm totally with you there. There, like somebody like Rofalos is going to change the equation. There's no Rofalos here in this list because that I've tried to avoid uh, the cards that are the highest power spikes. Another
Okay.
important thing to me here is that I want to maintain a pretty level power band, a relatively narrow power band. So I don't want a bunch of cards that are just like by far and away the best thing you could possibly be doing.
Okay.
Open your first pack and see a Rofalos, you should almost certainly take that
Right.
Rofalos. Like, unless you've got more power spiky cards surrounding him, right? That's just going to be the best
Absolutely.
thing in the pack. Um, so you could use Rofalos to ram into your Ulamog on turn whatever, and that's cool. But that's not an option here. Nor is Natural Order, nor is Tinker. Um,
Okay.
there. What else? I don't have.
The kind of super trifecta of
Mm-hmm.
cheaty things, right? Because I think
Yes.
the final one would be reanimate
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
on
exactly
that.
right.
Yep.
That's totally right. Reanimate,
Yep.
not here. Animate dead, not here. I don't have any very inexpensive reanimation spells.
Okay. Very cool. I uh, I definitely think there is a good time and a place for strategies like that. But personally, and I don't, again, this is a observation, not a judgment as well, find something that leans a little bit more towards fair magic to be more fun for me. I like the interaction and I like the decisions.
Yeah.
A turn two Gristlebrand removes most of the decisions from the game for both
Yes.
players. So I just have
Yes.
personally less interest in that. So I'm attracted to a list like this where you're going to have to make some both deck building and play decisions that will affect the outcome more heavily than a turn two Gristlebrand will.
Right. Yeah, I'm totally with you there. And just like you, I like being able to do those broken things in my in Aleasis, my 450 card list that I often talk about in my videos. I have a bunch more cheaty effects. You could have a turn to Gristlebrand for sure, and I think that's tons of fun.
Yep.
Um, but here's so like you say, problem A is that turn two Gristlebrand. It's awesome when you get to pull that off, but then the game's over, and that's that. You don't. There's not. That's not entirely true, of course, but you don't probably have many more decisions to make, and your opponent doesn't have
No.
many options. They need to have the answer immediately, or else. And anyway, you've just drawn 7 cards.
Yep.
Um, but so that's problem A. Problem B with the way I sometimes see the turn two Grizzlebrand supported is people will try to attenuate the problem of the turn two Grizzlebrand by making it by making that contingency less reliable, so that you can um, you it's possible for you to get the turn two Grizzlebrand, but it's difficult because there aren't one constrains the number of discard effects or one constrains the number of reanimation effects. So it's harder to put the deck together. So then when you do pull it off, that's super sweet, but it's going to be difficult to pull it off,
Yep.
right? I don't.
There's a opportunity cost to pursuing that strategy, right? Which
Yeah,
is it's less reliable.
right. Um, I don't totally love that either personally. If that's if that's the if that's your approach to solving the problem, that's totally awesome.
Right.
Um, but for me personally, I think that leads to feel bads as well. In as much as you've still got the problem of the turn two Gristlebrand that could exist, where the game's over and this is foreclosed choice for everybody. But moreover, this introduces the other feel bad of now my deck just doesn't function a
Right.
higher percentage of the time
Right.
if I'm trying to do this reanimation thing. So then you're like fighting this uphill slog, and then sometimes you roll the die and you get the critical hit or whatever, and like you
Yeah.
are able to do the Grizzlebrand thing that you want to do. All the stars have aligned.
Right.
Um, so I don't really like constraining strategies by limiting access to the necessary components that are going to make the strategy work. So in
That
this
seems to almost
environment, you
disperse. Sorry, that seems to almost disperse the feels bad, where we're just changing the amount of time that one player versus another gets that feel bad moment, right?
right,
Like it's either your deck not working or your deck working very well, but either way, one of us might not enjoy it. Um,
yeah,
it's just a question of how often that happens in either direction.
yeah, yeah, right. That's exactly right. Um, so I do. So I have Reanimator in the Cultic Cube, and I try to support it in a robust way. I try to support creature cheat in a robust way. So this is my version of combo. This is how I support combo. And my thesis is at the outset was I want to support these pillars of Magic gameplay in a really deep way. So I only have combo in the cube when I think that I can give people the tools to make it reliable. So I go really quite deep on reanimation effects and other kinds of creature cheat effects, but with the big caveat that, as you quite rightly pointed out, there's no reanimate, there's no animate dead. The effects start at 4 CMC. Most of the reanimation effects and creature cheat effects are 4 or 5 CMC. There are some that are 3 CMC, but they're typically creatures. So in black, for example, there's Coffin Queen, there's Doom Necromancer. Over in blue, there's Arcane Artisan. So these are all cheaty effects, but of course, being creatures, they're slow, they're fragile, they're 3 mana, but they take a turn to come online unless you've stuck a lightning greaves on them or something.
I'm even seeing in green Champion of Ronus, which is a favorite of mine that is very fragile.
Yes.
Yeah, I like it and I support it in my own cube, but yes, it is quite fragile. And then similarly, Elvish Piper, again, 4 or 5 mana. Well, 5 mana over probably 2 turns again, unless you've got something else going on.
Yeah.
But
for
effective when they land.
Yeah.
right for a 1/1. Yes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you look at her funny and she dies. Although she's got that just beautiful art on there.
I do like the art.
And yeah, right. So each color has access to cheat of the creature cheat. There's the least amount of it in white. There's Resurrection in white, 2 white for a sorcery that reanimates things. But all the other colors have more access. Probably, I think it's probably true that green is second to black for creature cheat effects. And there's even some in colorless. Quicksilver Amulet and Thran Temporal Gateway can drop stuff into play for you as well.
But again, at 4 or higher, really.
Yeah, at 4 and then 4 to activate. So it is a steep cost. But, the point obviously is that a turn 5 Grizzlebrand sounds sweet. A turn 4 Grizzlebrand, I mean, it sounds sweet. And you're still presumably going to get to draw your 7 cards, if nothing else. But anyway, the opponent has much more of a shot at interacting with the Grizzlebrand, at turning the game around when the Grizzlebrand's coming into play at that point and not on turn 2.
Okay, but your Grizzlebrand player also has a good shot at actually putting it down more than once in an entire league.
Yes,
because they don't need to roll the dice quite as many times. It's just they're not going to do it as early.
Yeah, right. That's a great way of putting it. That's exactly
It's a wonderful approach. I like that. I think that's going to make it. You still get the sweet plays because again, a turn 4 Grizzlebrand is still a thing. It's hard to deal with. And it must be dealt with, right? I can leave your 2 mana 2/2 on the board while I do other things. I can't play around your Grizzlebrand for a few turns. It demands an answer.
No. Right, it does. And obviously we're talking Grizzlebrand, who is among the best, if not the best, targets for this kind of stuff. But this was another balancing act that I'm sure many of us face, which is how many cheat targets we want in the cube as well. I kept increasing these actually because as I increased support for creature cheat across all the colors in the ways that we've been describing, I found that my players were vying more and more for the payoffs. So I kept throwing more in. So there's some kind of janky looking ones. I freely admit that. I still don't have some that just super annoy me. Like a bunch of the Eldrazi don't exist here, because
Right.
they're also I don't think super fun to play against personally. So there's like the new Emrakul from Shadows, or not Shadows, but Eldritch Moon, I guess. Anyway,
Moon, yeah.
Emrakul, the Promised End,
Yep.
Pathrazor of Ulamog is some old, pretty janky Eldrazi tech
Right.
too, who's just like not. I mean, he's very powerful on the one hand, but also he's pretty dorky.
Yeah.
And then there are all these Jund dragons. There's there's the Dragon, this 5-color dragon. These, um, honestly, the reason I've got some logic to some of these weird dragons, and that
I
is,
will say that that was on my list of things to ask was
well, yeah,
and I know we were going to get into multicolor, so maybe this will segue nicely. But
okay,
when I saw the Dragon, that did go on my list of
yeah,
that might be a recipient of the spiciest card award.
okay,
um,
good, yeah, it's a spicy one.
yeah,
This one, um, oh, I didn't even know this card existed. My friend Sir Funchalot, who was on my Chateau Cube podcast a couple episodes back, turned me on to this guy. And he is, he's some version of a progenitus, obviously.
okay,
And he has some advantages in that I don't even know if these are advantages over progenitus exactly, but you get to draw a card and then put a permanent from your hand into play when this guy attacks.
right,
So that's a pretty powerful effect. Like, you can ignore all this, you can ignore everything else, I think, that he says on the card. There's a bunch of trinket text on here, and who
yeah,
cares if you've got more dragons? It's sweet if you do, but you can ignore all that. You can just, like, here's this insane dragon who's a 10/10 flying thing, and whenever he attacks, you draw a card and you get to just cheat something straight into play. So in
right.
the cheaty decks that he goes in, that
Mm.
ability is quite strong, right? I mean, maybe you just put a land into play, and if that's what you got, and that's fine. But also, you could be cheating some other crazy thing.
He serves as a continuation because he is both a target
Hmm.
and an enabler. So
Yeah, exactly.
if my champion of Ronus can only get one thing on the battlefield, I probably want it to be this,
Yeah,
because that other ridiculous 8, 10, 12 drop in my hand can come behind
right,
uh,
right. He'll
if
bring that
champion goes.
along. Yeah,
So now you have to deal with two cheaters.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. That's right. He's a cool guy, and um, so then so let me I'll tell you some of the logic behind the Dragon and these Gen Dragons. Um, so thing A is, before I had any of these cards we're talking about in the cube, I had players who were I had I had more like, I don't know, big green creatures maybe. I don't remember what all else I had in here, but I had some other cheat targets, and
sure,
that people kept trying to cast. Darn it! Like I was describing earlier, with people who are trying to assemble elves and cast
right.
some 8-drop thing,
Yeah,
and
Woodfall
that,
Primus, right, with elves.
yeah, yeah, exactly, right. And I think that's a trap. And I felt that I was presenting a trap to my players, because also, as we've discussed, I go deep into sweepers. And so,
Mm,
like, you're just never going to be able to cast that Woodfall Primus off of elves. It's extremely unlikely. I
yep.
mean, I'm being hyperbolic again. Of course, you
Well,
can do it sometimes, but I think
it's a frustrating path.
yeah, right,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Because
Um,
you also have enough cheap burn. I mean,
yes, yes,
you know,
that's totally
all
true
your
too.
birds are going to get all the bolts.
Yes, all the bolts, all the shocks, Tarfire, Wild
Yeah,
Slash. I mean, yeah,
yeah,
uh, lit,
yeah.
cheap little creatures don't live long.
Nope.
And so these, like the Jund dragons, for example, are an advantage to them is that people don't try to cast them. I mean, maybe somebody does every once and again, but you know that it. You know, how many people at the table are going to try to go Jund so that they can cast a Hellkite Overlord? Like a Hellkite Overlord, that's a sweet card, but are you going to build a deck
Yeah.
around trying to cast a Hellkite Overlord? I hope not.
Right.
Um, so these multicolor things down here, I think put people off trying to cast them, which helps make their decks better on average.
Absolutely.
And then the other reason that they're advantageous is there's certain cards like Norwood Priestess. She's a green 4-drop creature. She costs 2 green green. On your turn, before you attack, you may tap Norwood Priestess to put any green
Mm.
creature from your hand into play without paying for it.
Nice.
And there's a Dramatic Entrance. It's an instant for 3 green green. And you may put any green creature from your hand into play. Also, we mentioned earlier there's Thran Temporal Gateway, the 4-mana artifact that puts
Yep.
a historic permanent from your hand into play. So these like Jund dragons and this Dragon 5-color nonsense, they tick these additional boxes. They're green, they're
Mhm.
legends. So they, they've got they go up very slightly in value. So these are some weird cards, I fully admit, but there's some rationale, darn it, behind their
Hey,
inclusion.
we call those spicy. Whenever
Spicy, good.
whenever you make a bad decision in Cube, we call it spice. At least that's what I do.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
And not to imply that these are bad decisions. I see your logic, and again, I think it makes sense that these kind of fill a slot not only as well as something like a Woodfall Primus or an Endray's Forerunners, which are very respectable top
Hmm.
end targets, but they definitely discourage you from thinking that you're gonna hard cast them
Right.
um, any more than once in 100 games, where you know you just happen to both have a lot of 1-for-1s, and you both get to 12 mana, and you're just sitting there trying to end it.
Yeah.
And yeah, why would you not then cast your Darigaz reincarnated?
Yeah.
But that's going to be the one-off, not the plan.
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. So on the topic of ramp, still kind of getting into that, I did notice we talked about the 1-drops and the 2-drops in green, which um, I have very much an appreciation of, kind of making them, having a lot of them, but stopping at 2. I think that's a reasonable place to cut it off. But I do notice that you don't run any rocks.
Hmm.
And presumably, I think we covered this, no wildfire as well. Is that correct?
Yeah,
I'm
that's
keeping a
exactly right. There's no wildfire, there's no upheaval, there's no
Okay.
tinker, there's no balance, there's no goblin welder, there's no red to ready.
Okay.
There's not like a lot of these more traditional reasons that one might want rocks. There are plenty of artifacts,
Yep.
um, but not rocks. So yeah, as you're getting at here, if I ran wildfire, I mean, to run wildfire, one needs to have rocks. It doesn't make any
Oh,
sense otherwise. So I don't need the rocks for that because I'm not doing that thing. Secondly, the rocks I found were given how sort of pared down I wanted this environment to be, and what a pure expression of these archetypes, of these macro archetypes I wanted the cube to evince. Um, the rocks I found were too good in control decks. They impinge too much on aggro's big advantage, the thing that should be aggro's advantage, which is its speed, of course.
It almost feels like it gives control access to something that green maybe should have a corner on in this environment. Not necessarily every environment, but in this environment in particular, which is that sense of getting ahead of the curve a little bit.
Right.
Not using rocks so that you can cast your 12 drop, but just so that you can cast those counter spells that are so carefully costed.
Yeah.
Blue is a very, very specific cost, and one blue is very different from
It
that.
is. Yeah, that's totally
Very
true.
meaningful. And one blue or even two blue is also very different.
Right.
And changing that math comes with a lot of consequences, I think.
It does.
That's kind of what I hear you getting at, which is it gives control a big advantage, getting ahead of decks who are specifically structured to operate at a certain speed. All of a sudden, that's invalidated by the fact that control can keep up.
Yes, that's totally right. I'm with you 100%. And as well, in fast cube environments, um, let's say a red deck wins, sly kind of deck, can pretty reliably kill people on turn 4, often, at
Yep.
least when gold fishing. That's not a crazy thing at all to be able to do.
Oh.
And so if that deck is on the play, then the control player doesn't have much time to interact with that opponent and try to deal with them. One way they can try to deal with that is by offering roadblocks, like I've talked about, removing from the environment, like the Wall of Omens. That does a real good job slowing the bleeding, changing the
Yep.
clock. Rocks also do amazing work changing the clock, in as much as Rock into Wrath of God lets you turn 3 that Wrath, which is key if you're a control player on the draw, key to preventing you from dying the next
Yep.
turn. So they're real good for control players. They represent, they represent getting to your end game faster, which, this is totally obvious. But again, the aggro deck doesn't care about that. They want their curve to stop at, say, 4, or even, maybe 3 if possible. So they're not trying to get into the end game. And once the control player drops something with even like 4 toughness, it's all of a sudden extremely hard for the aggro
It's kind of
player.
over.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
so none of
decisive.
those, no rocks. A ton of equipment, though, that helps the aggro decks a lot as well. Some amount of vehicles,
Yeah, even just a good smuggler's copter is a really nice. That's a really fun turn 2 play with an aggro
It
deck.
is. Yeah,
Helps validate your early plays once something bigger hits the board on the other side.
Yeah, for sure. And a really excellent pack one, pick one. It's a totally viable pack one, pick one, because
Great.
excellent aggro card, as you say, and it gives you outs to doing that aggro in whatever color ends up being open for you to do aggro in.
Yep. And I mean, it's no slouch in mid-range decks either. It's actually very versatile.
Yeah,
I think.
true. And you're pitching cards. You can like make a case for it in some versions of a reanimator build. It's a good card, very good card.
Okay, that makes good sense. So again, I'm really enjoying kind of the deeper dive into like philosophy, because this is all incredibly fascinating to me, and it's the kind of stuff that I think and talk a lot about in my own design and whatnot. So I'm curious on this, a little bit more of a fun question, less deep, but was there anything in designing this? Because I know that again, you and Gwen, like you said, came together and then kind of went out and started working these cubes up. Any like surprises or anything vexing that wasn't something you thought you'd have to spend a lot of time on, caught you by surprise, or
Yeah, the fact that this is a 540 card cube presented additional difficulties. And so I'm here I am a guy who runs a cube channel, but my experience with cube is limited in the sense that the only cubes I've ever designed are 360 or 450 card cubes. Actually, I think I honestly like 450 cards best, but that's another conversation.
I'll happily debate with you, although I actually agree.
Yeah,
Mine is a 460, and I quite like it there.
yeah, that's good. Um, WotC, it's a requirement of the Moto cubes that they be exactly 540 cards. And so that was a requirement we had to meet. And that inspired Gwen and I to develop these brand new cubes, start from scratch and do this project. If I could have used a 450 card cube, I almost certainly would have just given him my main cube and,
Sure.
tweaked it or whatever, but just gone with that because that has been, you know, well tested over a long period of time and have continued to refine it, mess with it all the time. Anyway, I feel sort of more comfortable about that cube in a certain way. Like I know it so much better. But
Yep.
this was a great opportunity to do, engage in this new project, a fun challenge, super exciting. So, but designing a 540 card cube, it's tough. Not tough in the sense that one's finding more cards. We can always find more magic cards to shove in. There's plenty of magic cards to go around,
Yep.
but balancing um, balancing macro archetypes, balancing especially sort of finer grained stuff like well, reanimator is an example where you need all these different components to make reanimator work, and getting the numbers right for all of that is tough when
Mhm.
360 cards of the 540 are being opened. This is all totally obvious to everybody, I'm sure, but anyway, it makes it harder when we're introducing so much more variance there.
Yep.
So that's tough. It requires sort of more testing, I think, than with the 360 card cube too, to get a feel for flukes, right? Like,
Yeah. The density.
yeah, exactly.
It's always the question of density, even at 360. But the question gets
Yeah,
harder the more you leave in the box
yeah,
every draft.
yeah, exactly. Because even at
Yep.
360, sure, you could open a pack that has where half the cards are red cards or something, and that's going to lead to a totally different draft experience. But
Right.
you can have that problem when you're pulling 360 cards out of your 540 card cube on a
Right.
grander scale, where somehow you pull out whatever 80% of your red section, and it totally skews the people's perception of the environment.
Right.
So there was that. Another personal challenge was I made it a real point here to uh, dramatically slash my gold section, and
Oh yeah, I was going to ask about that. So,
yeah, yeah, um,
like the one Rakdos card. I and I laugh because like I have so much respect for your willpower. I Rakdos is not my top guild by any means,
uh-huh.
and even so, I don't know if I would ever be able to put a stamp on a cube and say I'm ready for this to be done with one
Yeah,
Rakdos. It's you have more willpower than I do.
yeah. The one Rakdos card who's left standing here is Duretti, Ingenious Iconoclast.
Yep.
He's a fine gentleman. That's a good guy. He's super cool. I think in a previous iteration I still had K command, Kolagon's command in here, but then I realized In fact, I don't know. You may have noticed this too. I started pulling out all my naturalize and disenchant kind of effects. Like
Hmm.
there's some in here. Like there's Gem Razor actually from Ikoria.
Oh, yeah, a new one. Yep.
Yeah, the new Rex Sage. But I don't have many of these effects because honestly, there aren't many enchantments and
Hmm.
many enchantments that we like super care about apart from O-rings and things. And there are a number of artifacts, but it's not like we're not trying to blow up signets as we've talked about. There are
Right.
some artifact cheat targets, but not just tons and tons of them. And we don't have the problem of somebody tinkering in I mean, God forbid, a Inkwell Leviathan or something,
Right.
but even whatever, like a mere battle sphere on turn 2 or something, getting tinkered in, and then you just kind of need to have that naturalize.
Sure.
Um, so K command, you know, it's still a fine card. It's less useful for the artifact thing, and ultimately, a few things about gold cards. Thing A is I've increasingly come to feel that when gold cards are doing things that a single color can do, even though the gold card is probably going to do it a little better in some way and maybe cheaper in air quotes in some way, it's not worth it because of the gold requirement, of the cost of having 2 mana pips.
Yep.
Um, so, because it's such, I mean, you're locking a player into exactly these colors in order to cast the thing. As cards are going around the table, anytime you see a blue card, you are like 20% to be able to play that blue card. But if you
Right.
see a blue white card, you're like 10% to be able to play that blue white card. I'm, these numbers are, we can argue about the
No.
numbers, but the point I think holds.
Yeah.
Um, so I
Well,
don't like,
it's the problem of another way I think to look at it would be when you fan a pack, if you're in the color, so if you're say pack 2 or even pack 3, uh, when you look at that pack, you're going to automatically discard some percentage of those cards based on color.
mhm,
I'm even if I'm in Esper, that's going to leave me, again, big air quotes, right? 3/5 of the pack,
yeah,
um, if
right,
everything's balanced,
right,
and the gold cards are even narrower than the red or green cards that I'm already going to ignore, because a black red or
yeah,
blue red or green card is going to also be off the table.
right, right. Yeah, um, that's a good explanation, and I'm totally with you. Gold cards are so I don't love gold cards, or I want to. I mean, that's not quite right, but I want to minimize the number of gold cards because I
Sure.
think that they are worse for the environment. They're less likely to be taken. They're more likely to end up going around and around the table and ending up like these 15th pick cards because nobody happens to be in exactly Gruul or whatever it is, right? And just nobody wants this card.
Yep.
So then it's a dead card, in the environment, and I don't want that. Obviously, of my cube, I want every card to be something that somebody wants. Um, and if a gold card can do something that a single color can do, even if it's a little worse, then again, I really don't care about it. So like Terminate is a classic Rakdos card. It's, awesome card. Um, but Doomblade is about as good as Terminate is. Of course, it's not as good, but also it's one in a
It's
black, darn it. you know.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
There are many things. I think you could almost even just argue that Dismember is even better, um,
mhm, yeah,
just for being really one mana very often. In the context where you'd cast a Terminate, you would probably be very happy to cast a Dismember, paying
right,
the life,
right.
and I also take the point there that other people have made as well, that I feel generic cards going into multicolor is maybe not the best way to spend those slots. And
No.
again, terminate doesn't do anything unique. Whether it's better or worse, you can argue up and down all day, and as cube owners, we enjoy doing that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it is a 2-mana removal, and there are other versions of that. Whereas I doubt any other card in all of Magic that does what Duretti Ingenious Iconoclast does.
Yeah. Right.
Or at least not all of it.
Right. Right. And he's a removal spell too, it turns out, but he just like he jumped through a hoop, or you already have an artifact or something, but
Right.
he does the terminate thing as well.
Yep.
So yeah, I got rid of a bunch of these things. Also, some of these don't even count, like the Jund cards and the Dragon we talked about shouldn't
Right.
even be thought of here.
Right.
But also, I argued this in a video I made about designing gold sections a while back on my channel, but there are also cards that are sneakily gold cards. I just mentioned cards that appear in the gold section but shouldn't be. But there are also cards that are sneakily gold cards that don't appear there but maybe should. So here I'm thinking of like Wrath of God is the sort of classic example of this. It's a white card, obviously, but it's sort of secretly a Azorius card. It's a white-blue card because you're not playing this in white weenie. You typically shouldn't be playing this in your white mid-range deck. If you're in some like Selesnya mid-range thing, you're not playing Wrath of God probably because you're running creatures and stomping down.
As you pointed out earlier, this plays very badly with 1-mana accelerators, of which some number of your deck's going to be if you're in white green.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know. I go deepest in gold cards in Azorius and Dimir. Some poor guilds just get one, like Rakdos. A bunch of them just get a couple. I've counted, I don't know how WotC will count this when they present the list, but I've counted I don't run the full cycle of creature lands like Celestial Colonnade.
Oh, yes.
I just run the ones that I like. Some of them are kind of bad, especially the newer ones like Needle Spires and whatever. But I run some number of them, and I just call them. I call Celestial Colonnade an Azorius card because it costs Azorius to activate, and it's a creature spell. It makes a creature. You know this well since you've got your creature cube.
I do. Well, and on principle, I run all 10.
Yeah,
I'm very aware that I do feel that on principle I have to, but
yeah,
I always qualify it by saying something like on principle, because for sure, I think you've captured the best options. Colonnade is a well-regarded control supplement.
Yeah.
As I think is Tar Pit.
Yeah. Yeah, those are the two best for sure.
Ravine, and Ravine fits very nicely with those kind of monstery decks. As just one more beater that can get out of control. I think probably the only one that I would, if I was going to question any, would be the Selesnya one, Stirring Wildwood.
Oh yeah.
I think maybe, but a 3-mana 3/4 is nothing to sneeze at, and the reach means you can deal with flyers. So,
yeah,
I think there's something to be said for that one.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not amazing, but I think the reach does help it. Shambling Vent 2, those are the two worst ones. I think they both are.
I'll agree with that.
I think they're both.
I think there's a good argument for Vent with Lifelink.
Yeah.
And again, just the fact that Orzhov could be in something like tokens and need a little extra life or a backup blocker. I've had positive experiences with Shambling Vent in my cube.
Yeah.
Where some of the ones that you don't include, like Needle Spires, I mean, that's just a tap land, even in my cube.
Yeah. Yeah, like maybe if you suit it up or something, that's cool. But then you're like spending all this mana to activate it, and then you got to put the thing on it, and then it falls off. And I don't know. It's a whole process.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not a thing. But I
Yeah,
think Vent is good. I think it's, or at least playable.
yeah. Magister of Worth is a card that I kind of love too. It looks sort of techy. It's an Orzhov. Um, it's 4 white and a black for a 4/4 flyer who wraths the board when she comes into play. She's got all this will of a council nonsense, but
Oh, right.
she basically says wrath the board. So she's a 6 mana
Mm.
wrath that's got this 4/4 flyer attached. That's pretty good.
Leaves the body. That's great. Yep. Well, and
Yeah,
again, it goes to your point that if you want just a wrath, you get that at 4 mana, the kind of traditional sweet spot.
yeah,
But you have the option that you might be able to put a body on it if you're able to make it 2 more mana.
yeah, yeah. And the control decks love this kind of thing. That she functions sort of similarly to Celestial Colonnade, for example, um, because these are threats that the control deck. These are threats that allow the control deck to survive through its own sweepers. You know,
Right.
like Colonnade sitting there as a land, right? So you sweep the board, reset everything, and then you can be activating your Colonnade next turn and attacking with it. And this
Yep.
gal does something similar. She sweeps the board, but she's left you with a real threat. You've got this air elemental on the board, and so the creature lands are great for that. Also, the
Mm.
Genju. I ended up cutting a bunch of these, but I left Genju of the Cedars. It's an enchant land, and you can activate the thing, and it becomes a
Mm.
4/4 green spirit creature until end of turn, who's still a land.
Yep.
And when if that forest is killed, you get the Genju back. It's like a Rancor or whatever. It comes back.
Yep.
Um, so those effects, I like those effects a lot for helping you live through. In this case, this is a green card, but it helps the mid-range deck survive through controls
Right.
sweepers.
Well, and green has less access to the more power. I mean, it's got Ravine,
Mm,
but again, Wildwood may not be the best one, so this gives it one more kind of powerful option against control, against sweepers,
right.
which I like. I like that. Is so I think in our pre-discussion, I had asked about like pet cards, basically, stuff that you really wanted to put in, but just had for the sake of the greater good
Yeah,
had to cut. And I
yeah.
think you mentioned Genjus were one of those.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what other stuff could we possibly see in here if we were playing this in your living room versus or on your
Yeah,
kitchen table, playing versus on Moto?
yeah. I cut Will Kenrith. Um, do you know that guy? He's a 6 mana blue planeswalker.
Mhm. Yep.
He's from Battle Bond, along with his sister Rowan, who's trash, unfortunately. Poor Rowan.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep. Yeah, I haven't
but
heard anyone really advocate for Rowan, but
no,
Will I know is well regarded in the Cube community.
yeah, he's a great card. I like him a lot. I found in this environment he was not doing, or he wasn't doing enough for me here at 6 mana. So with some regret, I cut the guy, and like 6 mana is a big ask. Obviously, Will does a great job defending himself. I mean, really
Yep.
great, because his
Yep.
plus turns off 2 opposing creatures and makes them 0/3 with no text box.
Yep.
That's amazing. Um,
Oh yeah.
so that's super cool. And then, of course, he can draw you a couple of cards. That's super cool. But all of that, like 6 mana, is kind of a big ask for that package.
Right.
Like you need to
If
be
it's not
able
going
to.
to end the game for you.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. 6 mana thing, it needs to be able to end the game. The defensive thing, super cool, but like you're not trying to get shields up at 6 mana. That's a problem. That's too late.
Mhm.
So he's not in here any longer. That's sad. And then the other sadness, but which I totally understand, is that Modo doesn't support silver bordered cards. So Blast from the Past is probably my favorite silver bordered card. It's basically an Electrolyze but mono red. It's
Oh,
ex-
yep.
it's a super complicated card. It's got all these modes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it does.
it does. I mean
I
it
think
takes.
yes, this was in the recent reprint. So I actually this is in some of the unsanctioned decks.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's
So
cool.
yeah,
Um, yeah, it's one that takes a lot of explaining to people. But
mhm,
basically, it's one red red for a shock that draws a card. You can't divide the damage like Electrolyze.
okay.
Um, that's a great card. And then Sword of Dungeons and Dragons. I love that card. We've talked about that one too. I think, like over chat. It's
Yeah, yeah. I that is a fun one.
one of the
And one that I think feels a little bit less like a silver card than some of the others.
yeah, yeah. That's true.
Not as ludicrous.
No, like they had to add a little bit of quirkiness to it, like the because when you connect, it's one of the swords of X and Y, like Sword of Fire and Ice and so on. So it does all the
Right.
things you expect, except it has protection from rogues and clerics or something. And
Yeah, that's right.
when it connects, you make a 4/4 flying gold dragon token, and then you roll a d20. And if you roll a 20, if you get a critical hit, then you get to make another dragon.
Right.
Um, so if you ignore the die rolling thing, then it seems like totally fine and pretty normal and powerful, but also not backbreakingly powerful.
Right.
It's like for me, it's sort of the perfect sort of X and Y. Like it hits the sweet spot of good but not too good, also
Right.
not trash.
One I think a lot of the I think a lot of the trouble people have including those is the protection too. You
Yes,
know,
yes,
most of their effects are not so outlandish that you can't play them, but the protection is what pushes them over the edge. So
right.
the fact that it has, effectively no protection, there's going to be those off times, you know,
Yeah,
but
but it's
actually
very rare. Like the yeah, it's very rare that the rogues or whatever we just said are going to come up.
yeah, there's exactly 9 rogues or clerics in your current list.
Okay,
And they
good.
are
Out of
probably not the things you would uh, expect
no.
or be worried
Okay.
about.
Yeah, I was talking about this with Ben Fleischer the other day, and I was joking with him that I sure hope it's not relevant because when I'm playing, sitting around with my play group playing paper magic, I don't think any of us are like actually, we don't even, it's not in the forefront of our minds to be thinking about the rogue or cleric stipulation.
Right, right.
So we may be missing it. I don't know.
I don't think you'd be surprised by too many. Probably the biggest ones would be Giver of Runes as a cleric,
Okay, nice.
and Gonti as a rogue. Those are
Okay.
the two that pop up to me.
Oh yeah, that's funny. Etherborn rogue or something. Is that what he is then? Isn't he
That's exactly what
Etherborn?
it is. Yep, yep, yep.
That's
And
cool.
Doomed Necromancer, but the point of that is to sack it. So I don't think you're as worried about
No,
that.
probably not suiting up that guy. That guy, he's
No,
got a he's got a sad existence.
it's one purpose.
Yeah,
It's a brief one.
yeah,
Those are fun. I think that covered kind of the big stuff that I wanted to ask about. But is there anything else that you'd like um, our audience to know about it in preparation? I mean, as of this recording, only a few days left before yours goes live.
yeah. It's exciting.
Oh yeah.
I guess I will. A note is that among the goals for the design of this cube, I've talked about a bunch of the big ones. Another one is I'm trying to move away from environments that support or not support, but that reward um, uh, 4 or 5 color good stuff
Mm.
decks, where you're just jamming in a bunch of sweet cards. And I think that this is kind of there are different approaches to how one manages this. Also, it doesn't have to be a problem for you as a designer. If it's not a problem, that's great. This was just one of my personal goals in this cube. So that's part of the point of the focus on the macro archetypes here. I want people to find a lane. And this isn't to say I think people should try to play monocolor necessarily. Although aggro decks, as is typical of aggro decks, are going to be more successful the more monocolored one can be, I think. That doesn't have to be true elsewhere, but I'm trying to avoid mid-range piles of a whole bunch of stuff.
Yep.
So we'll see how successfully this turns out to be. We'll see whether this turns out to be true in practice when thousands of people are drafting this thing. But that's the idea anyway. So I would encourage you to try to avoid going down that path yourself. And by all means, take fixing highly. There's a lot of fixing. But I wouldn't be taking fixing with the aim that then you're also going to pick up every card that looks sweet and then, just try to stick them all together in this big mishmash. And instead, you should try to draft a clear deck, where a clear deck doesn't mean a narrow archetype, but a deck that has a focused overall strategy, overall approach to winning the game.
I like that. That's very clarifying. That was succinctly put. Yep.
Anyway, yeah, it's exciting. Wednesday, it's coming up.
It's close. It's gonna be here before you know it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, like I said, I'm gonna draft it as much as I can. In particular, stream it whenever I can. Sit down here without too many distractions.
So the cube goes live Wednesday, May 20th, and it runs to the 27th of 2020. And I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you about this. I have been producing other content around the cube as well, that people might find of use or of interest. So there's the conversation you mentioned with Gwen Decker, whose cube is online right now. And so that is on my podcast, Chateau Cube. And I have a YouTube channel, Cultic Cube. I'll be coming out with a video on Monday that will be a kind of Cliff's Notes guide to the cube, a little primer of the cube.
Great.
And that'll be coming out at the same time as an article on the mothership, which is exciting. And that's a longer form, more philosophical rumination on the cube. And that, so anyway, that might be worth a read as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Once that's live, share the link, because I'm a big fan of thorough links and show notes. So like I'll put up the episode with Gwen, because that was delightful and very helpful drafting Gwen's cube. So I have no doubt it will be helpful drafting yours.
Yeah, but I very much appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. Thank you so much for having me on your channel, which I've been thoroughly enjoying. It's so exciting to see not just more cube content. It's so exciting to see more cube content in general, but yours in specific has been wonderful. I love your original design acumen, where you're working with formats that are much more sort of your own creation and more particular and individually creative, and then showcasing lots of other people's individually creative, unique formats. So that's
I really appreciate that. Normally when I do these, I've kind of been finding my jam, but someone had mentioned they like the sort of little tongue-in-cheek awards that I sometimes give to cubes, and I don't know if I'll do that with this, just because I think we have so much better content here with the conversation. But I think I will say one of the ones I would personally nominate this cube for is the layers. because I've been following kind of your discussion again across, you know, your article and talking with Gwen and people texting, you know, on Twitter and whatnot. And one of the things I really appreciate is how it feels to me, and I don't know if it feels this way to you, but it feels to me like every card that you've included has a reason, and it's not just a reason like, you know, Snapcaster Mage is bomb, I love playing that, but
Yeah.
there's a depth of connection that you're thinking about that I think goes beyond what a lot of us put into, you know, our cubes, meaning it feels like you're very in touch with all the different interconnections in this cube in a very deep way,
Oh, well, that's
which
awesome. Well, thank you. That's I appreciate you saying that. I certainly endeavor to be thinking about these things and trying to, uh, you know, find the balance between all these different moving parts in the cube.
right,
And
right,
that's a challenge, but this is a challenge that all we cube designers are engaged in and love. Um,
oh, yeah.
because otherwise, why are we cube designers? Um, so
It's
yeah,
not for the fame and the glory.
no, not for that. Getting rich designing cubes, that's definitely not likely to happen anytime.
No, unfortunately. Awesome. Well, thank you again. And yeah, I really can't wait. It's going to be a lot of fun when this goes live.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you, JJ. It's been wonderful chatting with you.
Okay, well, I hope all of that was very helpful to you. There is nothing that can contain my excitement now. Literally, the only reason I'm not just bouncing off the walls with excitement to draft this on MTGO is because I want to get in a few more drafts of the Dekkaru Cube, which I will be doing on stream. Please head over to my Twitch if you'd like to check those out. If you give me a follow, it will let you know when I'm going up. And if you are following me on Twitter, you'll know via that route as well. In the meantime, please stay healthy, stay safe, and do lots and lots and lots of drafting. I will see you in the queues.